Welcome to a forthright audio podcast of last week's newspaper column with commentary. The column was a recap of the Washington State Republican Party convention held April 19th and 20th in Spokane. It might have been the first time ever the party attempted pre-primary endorsements, and the process didn't go quite as expected. Herewith the column, as published April 25th, 2024 in the Spokesman Review and titled, "It Doesn't Mean What You Think It Means." The post-convention results of candidate endorsements are going to leave some newbies to the political process disillusioned. As Inigo Montoya said in The Princess Bride, "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means." A party endorsement doesn't mean money, doesn't mean people who prefer Republican policies will vote for the endorsed candidates, and it doesn't mean nobody else gets to file for office and click prefers Republican when filing week opens on May 6th. It's a couple weeks worth of bragging rights and maybe a current mailing list. The fellow who asked from the convention floor how much money the Washington State Republican Party would be giving Semi Byrd as the endorsed candidate for governor must have thought there was a money spigot. There is not. Dave Reichert had withdrawn his request for an endorsement Friday morning, expressing exasperation in his Facebook post at how the candidate vetting committee handled late-breaking evidence of Byrd's violation of Rule 12. The rules required candidates seeking endorsement to disclose, quote, "any concerns in your past or present that may bring negative media attention to yourself or the WSRP," end quote. According to reports published in the Seattle Times on April 17th, an incident in 1991 resulted in a plea deal on a bank fraud charge in 1993. Byrd admitted to using his estranged father's name and social security number on an application for a line of credit. In his speech to the delegates on Saturday morning, he called it, quote, "a dark time in his life," end quote, and said there was no excuse. The candidate committee recommended pulling the governor's race off the endorsement ballot altogether. That recommendation was reversed by the vote of the delegates. It was the kind of chaos Robert's Rules of Order is designed to control, not unusual unless one has never participated as a delegate. American political party conventions sound more like a viral British-style parliamentary debate, with delegates booing and cheering while the chairman bangs a gavel and requests decorum. A high proportion of delegates were particularly enthusiastic first-time attendees. Reichert is one of several candidates who declined to sign a pledge not to file for statewide office, quote, "where the WSRP has solely endorsed another candidate," end quote. He's made it clear for weeks that he's in it through November. Non-compete pledges and pre-primary endorsements were a bad idea, according to Cindy Zapataki, former Spokane County GOP chairman. Quote, "each of these candidates have constituencies who have supported them with money. Everyone wants the other candidates' constituencies and donors just to flip over," end quote. Primary elections are designed to give time to get acquainted with candidates and the issues that drive them. Zapataki's advice to candidates? Quote, "stay in, go to the debates, get your views out there. You have a microphone in front of you. Ideas need to get out there. We need to exchange ideas at every level," end quote. The delegates at a state convention are not a representative sample of the entire electorate, or even the Republican-leaning electorate. Byrd launched his campaign right after the November 2022 general election and began visiting county party events. He took advantage of the long lead time to recruit and activate supporters into county party leadership and precinct committee officer positions around the state. It was a smart political move for someone whose only elected office has been local school board. Reichert filed at the end of June 2023 after wrapping up his work with a group working on intercepting human trafficking and missed the 2023 Lincoln Day dinner circuit. Jefferson County had endorsed Semi Byrd because he showed up and made personal connections. Lisa Farr, vice chair of the Jefferson County Republicans, said the candidate committee report made her think, quote, "why am I even here? And I wanted to walk out but didn't," end quote. She was impressed with how the body used the process and the rules to finally endorse a candidate. Her positive takeaway: a lot of people were passionate and engaged, and the governor's race is just one piece of the puzzle. She doesn't know who Reichert is and says she needs to get to know him better, but, quote, "if Reichert turns out to be our guy, I'm 100% for Reichert," end quote. Louis Musso III, who has been a precinct committee officer out of Kittitas County since 1976, took the long view. Quote, The pledge was well-intentioned, I am sure, but this experiment at artificial unity simply backfired. I expect the endorsement of Byrd will not even move his polling numbers into double digits. The fact that this isn't the first time the convention has gone against GOP voters as a whole and been politely ignored probably isn't well known. The afterglow of a convention and endorsements will have faded by the end of filing week. And I did that just that very night at 11:14 p.m. I got an email from a reader who wrote very thoughtfully. And I'm going to read the whole thing because it highlights some of the misconceptions and some of the things that are going to disillusion some of those folks who were at the convention for the first time. This correspondent wrote, I found your article today to be very disappointing. You are one of only a few Republican conservative contributors to the spokesman, and you seemed to be very negative about Semi Byrd and not accurate as I know the facts of the convention. As I understand it, Semi Byrd did not willfully withhold information about his background. The application asked for information going back 15 years. His transgression was more than 30 years ago. There should not have been a need to disclose that. Semi Byrd has a very powerful following, and I have not come across one person who won't vote for him as soon as they hear his platform, whether Democrat, Republican, or Independent. He is a true constitutional conservative and would be the best thing to happen to Washington State in decades. Please write something positive about Semi Byrd! ! We certainly don't need a pseudo-Republican like Reichert to lead Washington State. He isn't much better than electing a Democrat when you look at his voting record. She did sign her full name, and I did reply with a thank you for taking the time to provide your feedback, Allison. And I answered each of her points. And this commentary comes from that email that I wrote back to her. First of all, background checks for employment and political vetting are not the same. In politics, everything will be examined without a time limit. The strategy to survive and thrive is to tell all up front and embrace transformation as your story. Voters get that. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, but defensively explaining each skeleton as it slips out of the closet just doesn't work. Waving events off as over 15 years ago doesn't work either, especially when a candidate starts every stump speech with how his childhood shaped his character. You can't go from childhood and skip over young adulthood and come right to the present. My understanding of the candidate committee report, and admittedly it was hard to hear distinctly in the back of the room over the shouting, is that Byrd was found in violation of Rule 12, which doesn't have a time limit on it. According to the screenshot sent to me and included on the Substack post, Rule 12 says, are there any concerns in your past or present that may bring negative media attention to yourself or the WSRP that we should be made aware of? He did not mention pleading down a felony bank fraud charge to a misdemeanor. He misled the committee. The body had the right to reject the recommendation of the committee and proceed, but that doesn't change the violation. His explanation of a dark time in his life may have worked 6 months ago as part of telling a story of transformation in his life, but it's not going to work now. And the difficulty in writing about Semi Byrd is if one is going to cover the whole drama, one has to explain where it came from. And once you have to start explaining, it comes off as negative. In fact, in my first draft of this column, I didn't explain what caused the candidate committee to report and to make their report to disqualify Byrd. And my editor quite rightly said that I needed to add a sentence to explain the why, and she was right. Not because either of us was trying to be negative, but because it was necessary for a complete story. As for Reichert's voting record, according to an analysis at 538.com, he voted 92.5% with President Trump's agenda in his last term in Congress, a score 30 points higher than what the 538's expert political analysts predicted based on how his congressional district voted in the 2016 election. In other words, he was more conservative than his voters and than his constituents, and he voted that way. And now Bob Ferguson is painting Dave Reichert as a MAGA extremist, while Semi Byrd's campaign is calling him a Democrat. And the irony is that Byrd and Ferguson are probably helping Reichert capture the independent middle where most Washington voters live, a space that Reichert has demonstrated he can capture in successful past elections. Pointing this political reality out is not slamming Byrd or idolizing Reichert. They're simply facts based on the data. Semi Byrd has a long road to reach out to Democrats and independents. Calling people who support Reichert pseudo-Republicans and dismissing them as Democrats is not a winning strategy for Semi Byrd to broaden support beyond his admittedly strong base in November. If Byrd survives the primary, he needs their votes too. I have no idea how Allison received the message. She didn't write back, but her letter also highlighted the problem with judging a political race based on the opinions of only the people you know. That's the trap that left so many Democrats in despair when Hillary Clinton didn't win in 2016. They'd never met anyone who said they were voting for Trump and couldn't imagine such people existed. I engaged on some social media threads after that column, trying to answer questions from some of those disillusioned or questioning Byrd supporters, but the arguments were all pretty repetitive. Many seemed to hang their hat on expecting a 10 to 15-year limit on looking back at past criminal history based on employment background checks, but that's just politically naive. I mean, heaven help the next generation of candidates when videos from their college keggers start popping up when they're 50 and they finally decide to run for office. Or maybe the culture will have shifted and people will have no problem with that. But right now, the reality is it matters. One argumentative administrator behind the Facebook group, Semi Bird for Governor of Washington, wrote this. He said, "You and many other Reichert supporters thought we could never win the state convention nomination and endorsement either. Consider reconsidering your biased perception of 21st century politics." Well, to Mr. or Ms. Administrator, I never had any doubt that Bird would capture the endorsement. He played the internal partisan game well to get a lot of his supporters sent as delegates. And I know at least one delegation that voted one person short instead of seating an alternate because the alternate would have voted for Reichert. And there's no hard feelings about that. That's just how partisan politics is played. But the parties are much weaker than they used to be. And 21st century or not, you still have to capture a majority of voters in the broad electorate of people who have never heard of you. And running a statewide campaign takes money. This Bird Group administrator then tried to claim there would be $1.20 per Republican voter coming from the Washington State Republican Party for the endorsed candidate, as if that was a smugly typed mic drop. And that's totally bogus on two counts. One, Washington voters don't register by party, so there is no list of Republican voters. That's an official kind of list. There's lots of projections. The PDC sets maximum limits on how much a bona fide state political party may contribute, not mandates. The upper limit, is $1.20 per registered voter, not per Republican voter, for a state executive position like governor. That doesn't mean the party has the money or has to pay it as an entitlement because there was an endorsement. A review of the PDC reports shows the real story. As Chairman Jim Walsh said at the convention podium, Lauren Culp got $5,000 in 2020. There's no guarantee the party has any money to give when Reichert supporters and political pragmatists have been turned off as a result of being vilified by Byrd supporters on social media and at the convention. The Republicans tried an endorsement process at the state convention that turned out to be raucous, albeit Democratic, and at least they tried. Meanwhile, Democrats are making party endorsement a pay-to-play proposition, like the wealthy elites they've come to prefer. Quoting from Senator Mark Mullet, the Democrats' badly trailing alternative to Bob Ferguson for governor, Mark Mullet says, "I think it's a horrible precedent to set. You're going to have primary contests for Democratic seats in the state of Washington that are going to the highest bidder. You have to buy their endorsement." He said in an interview, "It's putting the thumb on the scale favoring Ferguson." They're playing it a little differently. They're expecting from any gubernatorial candidate that wants to be on their list of preferred candidates, they have to be able to write a check for $1 million. And Mullet doesn't have that kind of money. As predicted, the endorsements from the convention have faded into the background. The rancor has not. And candidates start filing on May 6th. The deadline to file is Friday, May 10th at close of business for the auditor's office in whatever county they are filing in. A link to track that filing can be found if you go to your county auditors and you look at elections. You can find out who's filed every day. You can find that out from the Secretary of State's website as well, or follow your favorite news outlet. Take the time to subscribe on Substack for email notification of new content. Whether you make a pledge or not, it'll pop up and ask. If you are entertained or educated, or maybe you like being exasperated, feel free to drop a few dollars my way. And thanks for listening.